She thought I would never find out. She thought I was too busy, too trusting, too in love to ever look closely at the cracks she was hiding behind her smile. For 2 years, I believed I was the luckiest man alive. I believed I had found the woman I would spend the rest of my life with. I was wrong. And what I discovered on one quiet Tuesday night would not just end my engagement. It would destroy everything she had built her entire future on. My name is Daniel. I was 31 years old, an operations manager at a logistics company, living what I thought was a simple, honest life. I wasn't rich. I wasn't famous. But I had something I was proud of, a good job, a small apartment I had worked hard to furnish, and a woman named Claire, who I was going to marry in 4 months. Claire was 29. Beautiful, charming, the kind of woman who could walk into a room and make everyone forget what they were talking about. She worked as an event coordinator, which meant her schedule was unpredictable, late nights, weekend meetings, sudden emergencies that needed her attention. I never questioned it. Why would I? I trusted her completely. We met at a mutual friend's wedding. She was the coordinator running the event, and I was the groom's best friend, standing awkwardly near the drink table. She walked up to me, laughed at something clumsy I said, and within 6 months, we were living together. Within a year, I had proposed. Life felt like it was finally falling into place. But looking back now, I realized the signs were there long before that Tuesday night. They were small, easy to ignore. A phone that was always face down on the table. A password that changed every few months for security. Nights where she came home smelling like a perfume that wasn't hers. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that after everything we had built, doubting her would be an insult to what we had. That Tuesday night, I wasn't even trying to catch her in anything. I was simply looking for a phone charger. Her phone was on the kitchen counter, screen lit up from a notification. And in that one glance, that one accidental, life-changing glance, I saw a name I did not recognize. A name saved not as a stranger, but as Babe 2. I want you to imagine that feeling. The floor tilting slightly under your feet, your chest tightening as if someone reached inside and squeezed your heart with their bare hand. I did not touch the phone. Not yet. I simply stood there, staring at 2 words that would unravel everything I thought I knew about the woman I loved. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe it was an old contact she forgot to delete. I wanted so badly to believe that, because the alternative was something I wasn't ready to accept. But deep inside, in that place where instinct lives before logic catches up, I already knew. I knew that my life, the life I had planned, the wedding I had already put a deposit on, the future I had promised myself, was about to change forever. What I didn't know yet was just how deep this betrayal went. I didn't know that the man behind Babe 2 wasn't some random stranger. I didn't know that Claire's deception had been running quietly, carefully, and cruelly for over a year. And I certainly didn't know that when I finally uncovered the full truth, it wouldn't just hurt me. It would completely destroy the future she thought she had secretly secured for herself. This is the story of how her betrayal, so carefully hidden, would eventually explode in the worst possible way for her. This is the story of how I stopped being the trusting fool she thought I was, and became the man who exposed everything. If you've ever trusted someone completely, only to discover they were living a double life behind your back, stay with me. Because what happened next will show you that the truth always finds a way to come out. And when it does, it doesn't just whisper. It roars. Before I tell you what happened next, I need you to understand what our life looked like from the outside. Because to everyone who knew us, Claire and I were the perfect couple. We had a routine. Sunday mornings, we made pancakes together and watched old movies. She would fall asleep on my shoulder halfway through, and I would just sit there, content, thinking about how lucky I was. Friday nights, we alternated between her friends and mine, always laughing, always comfortable. My mother adored her. My sister called her the sister I never had. Claire had a way of making everyone feel like they mattered, like her attention was a gift she was choosing to give you. I proposed on a beach during a weekend trip, nothing extravagant, just the 2 of us and a ring I had saved 4 months to afford. She cried. She said yes before I even finished the sentence. I remember thinking, in that exact moment, that nothing could ever feel better than this. We started planning the wedding almost immediately. Claire, being an event coordinator, took charge of most of it, which I was grateful for because I had no idea how to choose between ivory, and champagne tablecloths. She built spreadsheets. She had a folder of inspiration photos. She spoke to caterers and florists with the same confidence she brought to her job. I remember feeling proud, thinking, this woman is going to make our wedding and our marriage something incredible. Her work life, though, always felt slightly separate from mine. She managed corporate events, weddings, and private parties for wealthy clients. It meant odd hours. It meant her phone buzzing constantly with messages from clients, vendors, and colleagues. I never asked to see her phone, because why would I? Checking someone's phone felt like an accusation, and I had no reason to accuse her of anything. Looking back, I think that trust, that unquestioning trust, was exactly what allowed her double life to survive for so long. There was a man in her life named Marcus. I had met him twice, briefly, at 2 different work events. Claire introduced him as a client I've worked with for years. He's basically part of the furniture at these things. He was polished, wealthy, the kind of man who wore expensive watches and spoke with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. I remember shaking his hand and thinking nothing of it. He was just another name in the long list of people connected to her job. What I did not know was that Marcus wasn't just a client. He was the owner of the event company Claire worked for, her boss, in every sense of the word, and their relationship had crossed a line long before I ever proposed to her. I want to pause here and be honest with you about something. I am not telling you this story to make myself look like a victim who deserves your pity. I am telling you this story because betrayal like this doesn't happen overnight. It builds slowly, in silence, hidden behind smiles and shared pancakes on Sunday mornings. And the people living double lives are often better at hiding it than we ever imagine, because we give them the one thing that makes deception easy, our full, unquestioning trust. The weeks after I saw that name, Babe 2, on her phone were some of the hardest of my life. I didn't confront her immediately. I know some of you watching this might be shouting at your screen right now, telling me I should have asked her directly that very night. But betrayal like this needs proof. If I had confronted her without evidence, she would have had an easy explanation ready, and I would have looked like the paranoid, insecure fiancé who couldn't trust his own partner. So instead, I did something I never thought I would do. I decided to watch, to listen, to quietly, carefully, gather the truth before I said a single word. I had no idea, at that point, just how far this betrayal went, or how much more painful the full truth would be. I also had no idea that my quiet investigation would eventually lead me to a discovery so shocking. It would not only end my relationship with Claire, but expose a plan she had been building behind my back for months. A plan that involved my money, my name, and a future she had already decided to steal from me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go back to where the cracks first began to show, because if you look closely enough, betrayal always leaves clues long before it fully reveals itself. They say hindsight gives you perfect vision, that once you know the truth, you can look back and see every warning sign you missed. For me, hindsight didn't just give me clarity, it gave me guilt. Because when I really thought about it, the signs had been there for almost a year. It started small. Claire began working late more frequently. At first, it was once a week, then twice. Then it became so normal that I stopped even registering it as unusual. She would come home around 10 or 11 at night, always with a reasonable explanation. A client meeting ran long, a vendor canceled last minute, and she had to fix the schedule. A colleague needed help finishing a proposal. I never doubted her, because she never gave me a reason to. She was always affectionate when she got home. She would kiss my forehead, apologize for missing dinner, and curl up next to me on the couch, exhausted from her long day. Looking back, I realize now that guilt and exhaustion can look remarkably similar when you don't know what you're looking for. Then there was the phone. Claire had always been somewhat private about her phone, which I never thought twice about. Some people just are. But over time, that privacy became something closer to secrecy. She started taking her phone into the bathroom when she showered. She started sleeping with it under her pillow instead of on the nightstand. When it buzzed at dinner, she would glance at it, then quickly turn it face down, saying, "Just work stuff. Boring," before changing the subject. There was a weekend trip, about 8 months before our wedding date, when Claire told me she had to attend a corporate retreat for a major client. She said the company was flying in event coordinators from 3 different cities to plan a massive year-end gala, and she needed to go for 3 days. I remember driving her to the airport, kissing her goodbye, and telling her to have a safe flight. I didn't think twice about it. It was only much later, after everything came out, that I learned there was no corporate retreat. There was no gala. There was only a hotel suite in another city, booked under Marcus's company card, where Claire spent those 3 days with him. I also remember a moment, maybe 5 months before the engagement, when I noticed a new necklace around her neck. It was elegant, clearly expensive, a thin gold chain with a small emerald pendant. When I asked her about it, she smiled and said, "Oh, I found it on sale, isn't it pretty?" I complimented her, told her it suited her perfectly, and never thought about it again. I later found out that necklace cost more than 2 months of my salary, and it wasn't from a sale. It was a gift from Marcus, given to her the same week she and I had gone ring shopping together for our engagement. The most painful part, when I look back now, is that Claire was never cold toward me during this entire time. She never grew distant. If anything, she became more affectionate at certain moments, more attentive, almost as if she was compensating for something she couldn't say out loud. She planned little date nights. She surprised me with my favorite meals. She told me she loved me more often than usual. At the time, I thought it was romance. Now I understand it was guilt wearing romance as a disguise. There's a particular kind of pain that comes from realizing someone was capable of loving you and betraying you at the exact same time. It's not simple. It's not clean. It's confusing in a way that makes you question your own judgment, your own perception of reality. If she could hold my hand and lie to my face in the same breath, what else about our relationship had been a performance? I didn't have answers to these questions yet. All I had, on that Tuesday night, was a name on a phone screen, Babe 2, and a growing, sinking feeling that the life I thought I had built was standing on a foundation that had been cracked for a very long time. So I made a decision. I was not going to confront her based on suspicion alone. I was going to find out the truth, in full, before I said a single word. And that decision would lead me down a path I never imagined. One that would reveal not just an affair, but a calculated plan that Claire and Marcus had been building together, a plan that involved my future, my finances, and my complete and total humiliation. What I found would change everything. The days after I saw that name on her phone were some of the strangest of my life. I went to work. I answered emails. I sat across from Claire at dinner and talked about wedding seating charts, all while carrying a secret so heavy it felt like it was physically pressing down on my chest. I decided my first step was simple observation. I wasn't going to snoop through her phone or confront her yet. I wanted to see if her behavior matched what I already suspected. And almost immediately, patterns I had ignored for months started jumping out at me. I noticed that on the nights she claimed to be working late, her location, visible through a shared family app we had set up over a year ago for safety reasons, something she had apparently forgotten was still active, would show her somewhere far from her office. Sometimes it showed a downtown hotel. Sometimes it showed an upscale restaurant across the city, nowhere near any of the event venues she usually worked at. I remember the first night I checked that app with trembling hands, half hoping I was wrong, half already knowing I wasn't. Her little blue dot sat steady at a hotel address for nearly 4 hours. My chest tightened as I stared at the screen, feeling something between rage and heartbreak building inside me at the same time. I didn't say anything. I closed the app, put my phone away, and waited for her to come home. When she walked through the door that night, exhausted, apologizing for being late because of a vendor emergency, I hugged her like nothing was wrong. I asked about her day. I listened to her lie to my face, and I said nothing, because I needed more than a blue dot on a map. I needed proof so undeniable that she would have no room to twist the story. Over the next few weeks, I became someone I never thought I would be, a quiet, careful observer in my own relationship. I started paying attention to her tone when certain calls came in. I noticed she would step outside to take certain calls, laughing softly in a way she never laughed with me anymore. I noticed new clothes appearing in her closet that she never mentioned buying. I noticed she started going to the gym more, taking more care with her appearance on the days she claimed to have client meetings. One evening, I accidentally left my laptop charger at home and had to return early from work to grab it. Claire wasn't expecting me. When I walked in, she was sitting at the kitchen table, laughing into her phone, completely relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in months. The moment she saw me, her face changed instantly. She stiffened, mumbled something into the phone, and hung up quickly, saying it was just a friend from work being dramatic. I smiled, grabbed my charger, and left. But in that short exchange, I saw something I will never forget, the ease with which she lied. It wasn't hesitant. It wasn't nervous. It was smooth, practiced, automatic. And that told me something important. This wasn't the first lie. This was a skill she had built over time. That night, lying awake next to her as she slept peacefully beside me, I made a decision. I needed real proof, not suspicion, not a blue dot on a map, but something concrete, something I could not be talked out of believing. I reached out to an old college friend of mine, James, who worked as a private investigator after leaving the police force years earlier. I hadn't spoken to him in almost 2 years, but when I called him and explained the situation, he didn't hesitate to help. "Daniel," he said, his voice calm and steady over the phone. "I need you to understand something before we start this. Once you know the truth, you can't unknow it. Are you sure you're ready for that?" I sat in my car outside my apartment, staring at the building where Claire was likely inside right now, probably texting Marcus, probably planning our wedding menu with one hand and messaging another man with the other. "I need to know," I told him. "Whatever it is, I need to know." James agreed to help me, and within a week, he had already begun quietly gathering information. Phone records, financial statements, and surveillance during the hours Claire claimed to be working. What he found in just the first few days confirmed my worst fears and opened the door to a truth far more disturbing than a simple affair. Because it turned out, Claire wasn't just cheating on me. She and Marcus were building something together, something that involved money, property, and a plan for my future that I never agreed to be a part of. 2 weeks after I hired James, he asked to meet me in person instead of talking over the phone. I remember sitting across from him at a quiet coffee shop, far from anywhere Claire or her friends might see us together. He slid a folder across the table, and I remember staring at it for a long moment before I found the courage to open it. Inside were photographs, time-stamped, dated, undeniable. Claire and Marcus, walking together with their fingers laced, entering a hotel in the middle of the afternoon on days she had told me she was at a client site. Claire and Marcus, sharing a private dinner at an upscale restaurant, sitting far too close for two people who were supposedly just colleagues. Claire, laughing, resting her head on his shoulder in a way she used to rest hers on mine. I felt my hands go cold as I flipped through page after page. Each photo was a small piece of a much larger picture, a relationship that had clearly been going on for a long time, hidden in plain sight, disguised as work. But that wasn't even the part that shook me the most. James leaned forward, his voice low and careful, as if he already knew this next part would hurt more than the photographs. "Daniel, there's something else you need to know. This isn't just an affair." I looked into Marcus's business dealings, and I found something concerning. He explained that Marcus, the wealthy owner of the event company Claire worked for, was in the middle of a complicated legal and financial situation. His company was facing a lawsuit from a former business partner, and there were early signs that Marcus was trying to protect his assets by moving money and property into other names, names that wouldn't be immediately connected to him. One of those names, James told me, was Claire's. Over the past 8 months, Marcus had transferred a significant amount of money into an account under Claire's name, money that, on paper, looked like a personal gift, but was actually being hidden from the lawsuit. And here was the detail that turned my confusion into cold, sharp anger. Claire had used part of that money to help cover costs for our wedding, presenting it to me as her own savings, money she claimed she had been setting aside for years for our future together. I sat there in stunned silence, trying to process what I was hearing. Claire hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. She was involved in something financially deceptive, something that could have serious legal consequences, and I had unknowingly been standing right in the middle of it, trusting her completely the entire time. "There's more," James said gently, and I remember bracing myself, because his tone told me this next part would be the hardest to hear. "I found messages between Claire and Marcus. I'm not going to read them all to you, but there's one you need to see." He turned his laptop toward me, showing a screenshot of a message conversation James had legally obtained during his investigation. In the message, Claire had written to Marcus about our upcoming wedding, saying something that felt like a physical blow to my chest. She had written, essentially, that marrying me would make things easier, that having a stable, trusting husband who worked steady hours and never questioned anything would provide the perfect cover for her real relationship with Marcus to continue quietly, without suspicion, without complications, without anyone in her family or social circle asking uncomfortable questions. In other words, I wasn't the man she wanted to build a life with. I was the disguise she planned to hide behind while she built a secret life with someone else. A convenient, trusting husband who would never look too closely, never ask too many questions, and never suspect that his entire marriage was being used as a shield for his wife's double life. I remember sitting in that coffee shop, staring at the screen, feeling something inside me shift completely. The heartbreak was still there, deep and aching, but underneath it, something else was beginning to grow, a cold, steady determination. Claire thought she had found the perfect fool. A trusting, hard-working man who would give her the stability and social image she needed while she quietly continued her real relationship on the side, funded partly by money that was legally supposed to be protected from a lawsuit. She was wrong. Because the moment I closed that folder and thanked James for his work, I stopped being the fool she thought I was. I became someone with a plan of my own, a plan built not on rage or revenge for its own sake, but on making sure the truth came out in a way she could never hide from, control, or spin into her favor. What she didn't know yet was that her carefully hidden double life was about to collide, in the most public and undeniable way possible, with the truth she had spent so long running from. I want to be honest with you about something. When I first learned the full truth, the affair, the hidden money, the message calling me the convenient husband, my first instinct was pure devastation. I sat in my car outside that coffee shop for almost an hour, unable to drive, unable to think clearly, just staring at the steering wheel while wave after wave of grief and anger crashed over me. I thought about every moment of our relationship, replaying it in my mind like a movie I now understood was fiction. The way she used to whisper, "I love you," before falling asleep. The way she cried happy tears when I proposed. The way she planned our wedding with what I thought was excitement, but now understood might have simply been the performance of a woman securing her cover story. I could have confronted her that night. I could have driven home, thrown the folder on the table, and screamed at her until my voice gave out. Some part of me desperately wanted to. But another part of me, the calmer, more strategic part that James had helped me find over the past few weeks, knew that reacting emotionally would only give Claire the chance to control the narrative. She was good at controlling narratives. She did it for a living. If I confronted her in anger, without a plan, she would have time to cry, to apologize, to twist the story into something softer, something she could survive. She might even convince me, in a moment of weakness, that it wasn't as bad as it looked. I couldn't let that happen. So I made a decision that surprised even me. I decided to wait, to keep gathering information quietly, with James's help, until I had a complete picture, not just of the affair, but of the financial situation with Marcus, the hidden money, and anything else Claire might be hiding. I wanted the truth to be so complete, so undeniable, that there would be no room for her to spin it into something forgivable. Over the following weeks, I continued living what looked, from the outside, like a completely normal life. I went to work. I helped pick out wedding invitations. I smiled at Claire's jokes and let her rest her head on my shoulder during movie nights, even though every part of me felt like it was breaking a little more each day. It was, without question, one of the hardest things I have ever done. Pretending not to know is a special kind of pain, a constant performance layered on top of already unbearable heartbreak. There were nights I locked myself in the bathroom just to breathe, just to remind myself why I was doing this, why patience mattered more than immediate release. James continued his investigation quietly in the background. He confirmed that Marcus's lawsuit was moving forward, and that the money hidden in Claire's name was becoming a bigger legal risk by the week. He also discovered something I hadn't expected. Marcus was married. Not divorced, not separated. Married, to a woman named Vanessa, who had no idea her husband was involved with one of his employees, let alone that he was quietly transferring assets into that employee's name to protect himself from a lawsuit. This detail changed everything for me, because now I understood that Claire's betrayal wasn't just hurting me. There was another woman out there, Vanessa, who was also being deceived, also being kept in the dark, also trusting someone who was living a double life right under her nose. I remember telling James, during one of our meetings, I don't just want to walk away quietly. I want the truth to come out completely, for me, and for anyone else being lied to in all of this." James nodded slowly. "Then we need to be smart about how we do it. If we move too early or too emotionally, Claire and Marcus could cover their tracks, especially with the money. We need to time this carefully." That was the moment the real plan began to take shape. Not a plan built on revenge for revenge's sake, but a plan built on exposing the truth so completely, so publicly, that neither Claire nor Marcus would be able to hide from it, deny it, or control how the world saw it. I had no idea, at that point, just how dramatically this plan would unfold, or how the very wedding Claire had used as her disguise would become the exact place where her secret life would finally, completely, unravel. The plan came together slowly, over several careful weeks, built on two things: patience and precision. James, with his investigative background, helped me understand something crucial. The truth, on its own, is powerful. But timing determines whether that truth destroys deception or gets buried by it. We identified 3 things we needed before taking any real action. First, we needed complete documentation of the affair, not just photographs, but a clear timeline showing how long it had been going on and how it overlapped with our engagement and wedding planning. This would remove any chance of Claire claiming it was a recent mistake or a moment of weakness. Second, we needed clear evidence of the financial situation, specifically proof that money from Marcus's business, money connected to his ongoing lawsuit, had been transferred into Claire's name, and that some of that money had been used for our wedding expenses without my knowledge. This was important not just emotionally, but legally, because it meant I could potentially be pulled into a financial mess I had no part in creating. Third, and this became increasingly important to me, we needed to find a way to make sure Vanessa, Marcus's wife, learned the truth as well. Not out of cruelty, but out of fairness. She deserved to know what her husband was doing, just as much as I deserved to know what my fiancée was doing. James suggested reaching out to a lawyer to understand my legal standing regarding the wedding expenses and any potential financial exposure. I met with an attorney named Rachel, who specialized in financial disputes, and explained the entire situation. She confirmed what James had already suspected, because some of the tainted money had gone toward joint wedding expenses under both our names. I could potentially face complications if Marcus's lawsuit escalated and investigators started tracing where his hidden assets had gone. "You need to protect yourself financially before anything else," Rachel told me firmly. "Whatever happens emotionally, your name cannot be tied to money that could later be seized or investigated." This gave me a clear, practical first step. Quietly, without raising suspicion, I began separating my finances from anything connected to the wedding fund Claire managed. I opened a new personal account. I stopped contributing my own money to the joint wedding account, telling Claire I wanted to save a little extra for the honeymoon as a cover story, which she happily accepted, never suspecting the real reason. At the same time, James continued strengthening the evidence. He confirmed hotel records, dates, and even obtained a statement from a front desk employee who recognized Claire and Marcus as frequent guests. Every piece of evidence added another layer of undeniable truth to the picture we were building. The hardest part of this entire process wasn't gathering evidence. It was continuing to live beside Claire every day, knowing everything I knew, while she remained completely unaware. There were moments she would look at me with what seemed like genuine love in her eyes, and I would feel a flicker of doubt, a small voice asking, "What if this part is real? What if she truly loves you, even while betraying you?" But then I would remember the message James showed me, the one where she called me the convenient husband, the perfect cover for her real relationship. And that voice would go silent, replaced by quiet, steady resolve. About 6 weeks before our wedding date, Claire came home one evening glowing with excitement. She told me the venue had just confirmed final details, that the guest list was locked in, and that everything was falling perfectly into place. She hugged me tightly and said, "I can't believe we're actually about to get married. This is really happening." I hugged her back, and for a brief moment, standing there in our apartment, I let myself feel the full weight of what I was about to do. This woman, who I had loved completely, who I had planned an entire future with, was about to walk into her own wedding believing she had successfully built the perfect disguise for her double life. She had no idea that the very event she had used to hide behind our wedding, was about to become the exact place where everything she had hidden would be revealed, in front of everyone who mattered most to her. I looked at her, smiled softly, and said, "Yeah, it's really happening." But not in the way she thought. As our wedding date approached, life took on a strange, almost surreal quality. On the surface, everything looked completely normal. Claire finalized flower arrangements and seating charts. My mother helped me pick out a suit. Friends and family began arriving in town early, filling our weekends with dinners, showers, and celebrations. Underneath that surface, however, I was living a completely different reality. One where every smile Claire gave me felt like both a wound and a piece of evidence. One where every wedding-related phone call she made in private felt like a countdown toward a moment only I knew was coming. James and I finalized our plan carefully. We decided the most effective, undeniable way to reveal the truth would be during a moment when Claire could not control the narrative, when denial would be impossible, and when the people who needed to see the truth, both my family and Vanessa, Marcus's wife, would be present at the same time. That meant the wedding itself. I know some people might think this decision was cruel or overly dramatic, but I want you to understand something important. I wasn't planning to embarrass Claire for the sake of spectacle. I was planning to reveal a truth that deserved to be seen clearly by everyone affected by it at once, rather than allowing Claire to control the story in private conversations after the fact, where she could soften the truth, cry selectively, and manipulate people's sympathy the way she had clearly done before. James helped me quietly reach out to Vanessa, Marcus's wife, about 3 weeks before the wedding. This was, without question, one of the most delicate parts of the entire plan. I didn't want to reach out in a way that felt aggressive or accusatory. I wanted her to see the evidence clearly and calmly, and make her own decision about what she wanted to do with it. I remember sitting across from Vanessa at a quiet cafe, watching her expression change as I gently explained the situation and showed her a portion of the evidence James had gathered. Her reaction was heartbreakingly familiar. The same shock, the same disbelief, the same devastating realization that someone she trusted completely had been living a secret life right beside her. "I suspected something," she admitted quietly, staring at the table. But every time I asked, he made me feel crazy for asking. He always had an explanation. I understood that feeling more than she could have known. Vanessa and I made a quiet agreement. She wanted to see the truth revealed clearly as well, not out of revenge, but because she, like me, deserved honesty after being deceived for so long. She agreed to attend the wedding, something Marcus had already planned for her to do as his supportive wife, standing quietly among the guests, without either Claire or Marcus knowing what she now knew. In the final 2 weeks before the wedding, I focused on staying calm, staying steady, and not allowing my emotions to slip and reveal what was coming. It required a level of self-control I didn't know I had. There were nights I would lie awake beside Claire, listening to her breathe peacefully beside me, feeling a strange, aching mixture of grief for what we used to have, and quiet resolve for what was about to happen. 2 days before the wedding, Claire took my hands and looked at me with tears in her eyes. "I know it's been a stressful few months planning everything," she said softly, "but I just want you to know how happy I am. I can't wait to marry you." I looked at her, this woman who had spent over a year building a hidden life beside the one she was building with me, and I said the only thing I could say honestly in that moment. "Everything is about to change, Claire. I promise you that." She smiled, thinking it was a romantic statement about our upcoming marriage. She had no idea how true and how different from her expectation those words really were. The morning of the wedding arrived with a strange, quiet calm. I remember standing in the small preparation room at the venue, my father helping me straighten my tie, my closest friends laughing softly in the background, trying to keep the mood light. From the outside, I looked like any other nervous, excited groom. Inside, I felt like a man standing at the edge of something enormous, something that couldn't be undone once it began. James had arrived early, blending quietly into the venue staff with the wedding planner's unknowing cooperation. Claire, ironically, had hired an outside coordinator for her own wedding since she didn't want to work on her big day, which made it easier for us to control small details behind the scenes. The plan was simple in structure, even though it had taken months to prepare. Rather than staging a loud, chaotic confrontation during the ceremony itself, we decided the most respectful, controlled, An undeniable moment would come during the reception, right before the formal toasts began, a moment when both families, all our friends, and crucially, Vanessa, were already gathered together, phones mostly put away, full attention on the front of the room. The ceremony itself went forward exactly as planned. I stood at the altar, watching Claire walk down the aisle in her wedding dress, radiant, smiling, completely unaware that within a few short hours, her entire carefully constructed world was going to change. I said my vows. She said hers. I listened to her promise honesty, loyalty, and partnership for as long as we both shall live, and I felt the weight of every lie behind those words settle heavily in my chest. I want to be honest with you. There was a small, quiet part of me, even in that moment, that ached for the version of this day I had once imagined. The version where those vows were true. But I reminded myself gently that the wedding happening in front of everyone was built on a foundation Claire herself had cracked long before I ever discovered it. The reception began. Dinner was served. Laughter filled the room. Claire moved from table to table, glowing, greeting guests, completely in her element. Marcus was seated near the front with Vanessa, dressed sharply, playing the role of a close family friend and business associate, completely unaware that his wife now knew everything. As the time for toasts approached, my best man stood to give his speech, exactly as scheduled. Then, according to the plan, it was my turn to speak, something Claire had specifically asked me to do, wanting a heartfelt moment from her new husband in front of everyone. I stood, glass in hand, and walked to the small stage at the front of the room. Claire beamed up at me, her eyes glistening with happy tears, completely unaware of what was about to happen. I looked out at the room, my family, her family, our friends, and quietly, near the back corner, Vanessa, sitting perfectly still, waiting. I took a breath, and I began to speak. Thank you all for being here today. I began, my voice steady despite the storm building inside my chest. Weddings are supposed to be about honesty, about standing in front of the people who matter most, and promising to build a life together based on truth. The room was quiet, warm smiles on every face, no one suspecting yet what was coming. When I met Claire, I continued. I believed I had found someone who shared that same value, honesty. I believed every word she said to me, every promise, every plan we built together for our future. I glanced at Claire. Her smile was still there, but I saw something flicker behind her eyes, a small, instinctive uncertainty, as if some part of her sensed the tone shifting before her mind fully caught up. But a few months ago, I said, my voice calm but firm, I discovered something that changed everything I thought I knew about the life we were building together. The room's energy shifted instantly. Smiles began fading into confused, uncertain glances between guests. I discovered that for over a year, Claire had been in a relationship with someone else, I said clearly, without raising my voice, without anger, simply stating the truth plainly. Someone many of you actually know. Someone sitting in this very room. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Claire's face went pale, her hand gripping the edge of the table beside her. Daniel, what are you? I'm telling the truth, Claire. I said gently but firmly, cutting her off, not with cruelty, but with the calm steadiness of a decision I had made months ago. Something you and I both know you've had trouble doing for quite some time. I turned my gaze toward Marcus, who sat frozen, his confident expression completely drained from his face. Marcus, I said, I think it's time your wife finally hears the full truth too, not just the version you've been giving her. The entire room turned toward Vanessa, who stood slowly, calm, and composed in a way that told me she had been mentally preparing for this moment for weeks. I already know, Vanessa said clearly, her voice carrying across the stunned silence of the room. I've known for 3 weeks. I came today because I wanted to see, with my own eyes, the moment my husband's lies finally caught up to him. The room exploded into whispers, shocked expressions, hands covering mouths in disbelief. Claire stood frozen at her seat, tears streaming down her face, whispering my name over and over, as if repetition alone could undo what had just been said. I held up a small folder, not to read aloud, not to publicly humiliate her further with details, but simply to show that what I was saying was not an accusation born from suspicion or anger. It was fact, documented, undeniable. I'm not doing this to hurt anyone unnecessarily, I said, addressing the room. I'm doing this because both Vanessa and I deserve the truth, and neither of us were given it honestly. We were both living beside people who built entire secret lives, hidden behind smiles, behind love, behind promises that weren't real. Claire finally found her voice, standing shakily, her makeup streaked with tears. Daniel, please, let me explain. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think, Claire, I said quietly, my voice breaking slightly for the first time. I have the messages. I have the photographs. I have proof of the money Marcus moved into your name to hide it from his lawsuit. Money you used, without telling me, to help pay for this very wedding. A sharp gasp rippled through the crowd, particularly from Claire's own family, who looked at her now with a mixture of shock and dawning horror. I loved you, I said, my voice softening, no longer performing for the room, speaking now only to her. I loved you completely. And I think, somewhere in all of this, some part of you might have loved me too. But love built on lies isn't really love, Claire. It's just a very convincing performance. I set the small folder down gently on the table in front of her, not as a weapon, but as a closing statement. I hope, someday, you find honesty within yourself, I said quietly. Because you're going to need it, especially now. I turned, walked off the small stage, and left the reception hall, leaving behind a room in complete, stunned silence. A room where the truth Claire had spent so long hiding had finally, undeniably, come into the light. The days following the wedding were chaotic in ways I never could have fully prepared for. Word spread quickly, as it always does. Friends who had witnessed the moment shared what happened with others who couldn't attend. Family members called, some in shock, some in anger on my behalf, some simply wanting to understand how something so devastating had unfolded in front of them without warning. Claire tried reaching out to me multiple times in the days that followed. Calls, messages, even showing up outside my apartment once, asking for a chance to explain. I understood her desperation. I even felt a flicker of old sympathy in certain quiet moments. But I had already given her a year of blind trust, and that trust had been used against me in ways I was still uncovering. Legally, things moved quickly once Marcus's lawsuit intensified. Investigators looking into his hidden assets eventually traced the money transferred into Claire's name, which placed her under scrutiny as well. Because I had carefully separated my own finances months earlier, following Rachel's advice, I remained protected from the legal complications that began unfolding around Claire and Marcus. Vanessa filed for divorce within weeks. She later told me, during one of the few conversations we had afterward, that despite the pain, she felt a strange sense of relief. The relief of finally understanding a truth she had sensed for a long time, but had never been allowed to confirm. Marcus's business faced serious consequences. The lawsuit, combined with the exposure of his attempts to hide assets, led to a much larger financial investigation into his company. Several long-term clients, uncomfortable with the public scandal, quietly withdrew their business. The company that once seemed untouchable began losing its foundation piece by piece. As for Claire, her professional reputation suffered significantly. In an industry built on trust, discretion, and personal relationships, word of what happened spread through professional circles faster than she could control. Clients who once respected her began quietly distancing themselves. The company she worked for, already facing scrutiny because of Marcus's legal troubles, eventually let her go during a broader restructuring. I won't pretend the following months were easy for me either. Ending an engagement, even one built on betrayal, leaves a particular kind of emptiness. I had spent 2 years imagining a future with Claire, and even knowing the truth couldn't instantly erase the emotional muscle memory of loving someone deeply. There were nights I sat alone in my apartment, staring at wedding photos I hadn't yet deleted, feeling a strange, complicated grief, mourning not the woman Claire truly was, but the version of her I had believed in for so long. Slowly, though, with time, and with the support of family and close friends who stood beside me through the entire ordeal, I began rebuilding. I focused on my work. I reconnected with hobbies I had set aside during the wedding planning chaos. I allowed myself to simply exist without the constant weight of secrets and investigation hanging over every day. About 8 months after the wedding, I ran into Vanessa at a small community event. We sat together for coffee, talking not about Marcus or Claire, but about how we were both slowly rebuilding our own individual lives. There was a quiet, mutual understanding between us. Two people who had both trusted deeply, both been betrayed deeply, and both were choosing, despite everything, to move forward rather than remain trapped in bitterness. I used to think discovering the truth would destroy me. Vanessa told me that day. But honestly, it set me free. I just wish it hadn't taken so long. I understood exactly what she meant. About a week after the wedding, I received a phone call I hadn't expected. It was Marcus. I almost didn't answer. Part of me wanted nothing more to do with either him or Claire ever again. But another part of me, the part that had spent months carefully gathering the truth, felt a strange pull to hear what he possibly thought he could say to me now that everything was out in the open. "Daniel," he said, his voice tighter than I had ever heard it. None of the smooth, confident charm he usually carried into every room. "We need to talk." I agreed to meet him, not out of any desire for reconciliation or friendship, but because I sensed there was more to understand about the full scope of what had happened, and I was right. We met at a quiet park, away from prying eyes, away from anyone who might recognize either of us after the wedding had become the talk of both our social circles. Marcus looked different than the polished, confident man I remembered meeting at those early work events. His shoulders were tense. His eyes carried the weight of a man whose carefully constructed world was rapidly falling apart. "I need you to understand something," he said, sitting down heavily on a bench beside me. "What happened with Claire, it wasn't planned the way it probably looks from the outside. It started small. A conversation after a long event. Then dinner. Then it just kept going, and every time I tried to end it, I found reasons not to." I listened quietly, not because I owed him sympathy, but because I wanted to understand the full picture, especially anything that might affect the legal situation I now found myself unexpectedly connected to. "The money," I said finally. "Tell me about the money." Marcus rubbed his face with both hands before answering. "The lawsuit against my company was going to strip me of almost everything if I lost. My lawyer suggested protecting certain assets by moving them into names not directly connected to the company. Claire agreed to let me use her name for some of it. I told her it was low risk. I was wrong. "You used her," I said flatly. "And she used me." Marcus didn't argue with that assessment. "I know how this looks," he said quietly. "But I want you to know, Daniel, Claire wasn't simply a victim in this either. She knew exactly what she was agreeing to. She knew the risk. She chose to move forward with it anyway, the same way she chose to keep planning a wedding with you while continuing things with me." There was a strange, uncomfortable relief in hearing him say that so plainly. Part of me had wondered, in quieter moments after the wedding, whether Claire had been somehow pressured or manipulated into her choices by a wealthy, powerful man used to getting what he wanted. Marcus's own words made it clear that wasn't the full story. Claire had made her own choices, fully aware of the risks and consequences at every step along the way. Before we parted, Marcus said one more thing that stayed with me for a long time afterward. "For what it's worth, I am sorry for the part one played in hurting you. That's not something I say lightly. I built a career on being someone people trusted with their events, their money, their reputations. I lost sight of what that trust actually meant somewhere along the way. I didn't offer him forgiveness that day, and I don't think he expected me to. But I did walk away from that conversation with a clearer understanding of just how deep the deception had run, not just between Claire and me, but in the choices multiple people had made, each convincing themselves, in their own way, that they could keep their double lives contained forever. They were wrong. And the unraveling, once it began, touched far more lives than any of them had anticipated. In the months following the wedding, the legal situation surrounding Marcus's company grew increasingly serious. What had started as a single lawsuit from a former business partner expanded into a broader investigation once financial regulators began examining the pattern of asset transfers Marcus had made in the year leading up to the case. Claire, unfortunately for her, found herself squarely in the middle of that investigation. Because a portion of the money transferred into her name had been used for wedding expenses, investigators requested detailed records of how those funds had been spent. Rachel, the attorney I had consulted months earlier, later told me that this kind of financial entanglement, even when someone isn't the primary target of an investigation, can create serious complications, sometimes lasting years, involving frozen accounts, mandatory disclosures, and expensive legal fees just to prove one's own limited involvement. I felt an odd, complicated mixture of emotions watching this unfold from a safe distance. On one hand, I felt no satisfaction in watching someone I had once loved face genuine financial and legal stress. On the other hand, I couldn't ignore the reality that Claire's own choices made with full awareness of the risk, according to Marcus, had led her directly into this situation. Because I had separated my finances early, following Rachel's advice months before the truth even came out publicly, I remained completely uninvolved in the investigation. Rachel later told me this decision likely saved me from months, possibly years, of unnecessary legal entanglement, expensive documentation requests, and stress that had nothing to do with my own actions. This is exactly why I always tell my clients to protect their financial identity, even in relationships built on trust. Rachel told me during our final follow-up meeting. Trust is important in a relationship, but your name, your credit, your financial identity, those need protection regardless of how much you trust someone, because circumstances outside your control can still affect you. It was a lesson I carried forward long after the legal dust settled, one I still share, when appropriate, with friends navigating their own serious relationships and financial decisions. In the days after the wedding, I had to do something I hadn't fully prepared myself for. I had to sit down with my own family and explain, in full, everything that had led to that moment on the small stage in front of everyone we knew. My mother, who had grown to love Claire over the 2 years we were together, took the news the hardest. She had spent months looking forward to gaining a daughter-in-law. She had helped address wedding invitations by hand, had picked out her own outfit with Claire's opinion in mind, had genuinely believed she was watching her son build a lasting, happy future. When I explained everything to her, the affair, the hidden money, the message calling me the convenient husband, I watched her expression shift from confusion to disbelief to a quiet, simmering anger I had rarely seen from her before. I sat across from her at family dinners. My mother said quietly, shaking her head. I trusted her completely. How did none of us see this? I told her what I had come to understand myself over the past months, that people who are skilled at deception don't announce themselves. They don't wear their double lives on their sleeve. They smile at family dinners. They laugh at your jokes. They make you feel, genuinely, like they belong in your life. That's exactly what makes betrayal like this so difficult to detect, and so painful once it's finally revealed. My father, always more reserved with his emotions, said very little that evening. But a few days later, he pulled me aside and told me something I still think about often. I'm proud of you, he said simply. Not because of what happened, but because of how you handled it. You didn't let anger control you. You found the truth, and you let the truth speak for itself. That takes more strength than shouting ever could. My younger sister, who had once called Claire the sister I never had, struggled the most with a different kind of grief. Not just losing Claire from our family, but losing the version of trust she once had in reading people. I really thought I knew her, she told me one night, sitting on my couch with a cup of tea going cold in her hands. How do you ever trust anyone again after something like this? It was a fair question, and one I didn't have a perfect answer for at the time. All I could tell her was what I was slowly learning to tell myself. That betrayal from one person doesn't mean everyone is capable of the same deception. It simply means we learn, painfully, to pay closer attention, to trust actions over words, and to protect our own well-being even while remaining open to real connection with others. Claire's own family reacted in ways I hadn't expected either. Her parents reached out to me privately, weeks after the wedding, offering a quiet, sincere apology, not on Claire's behalf, since that wasn't theirs to give, but for the pain their daughter's choices had caused me. Her mother, in particular, sounded devastated on the phone, admitting that she had noticed small inconsistencies over the past year, but had chosen, much like I once had, to give Claire the benefit of the doubt rather than ask uncomfortable questions. I keep thinking about all the times I could have asked her directly, her mother said quietly. I think some part of me didn't want to know the answer. I understood that feeling more than she realized. It was the same instinct that had kept me from confronting Claire the very first night I saw that name, Babe 2, glowing on her phone screen. Sometimes, the fear of confirming a painful truth feels heavier than the comfort of simply not asking. These conversations, difficult as they were, became an important part of my healing. They reminded me that betrayal doesn't just affect the two people directly involved. It ripples outward, touching parents, siblings, friends, entire communities of people who built trust around a relationship they believed was real. Facing that ripple effect honestly, rather than avoiding it, helped me understand the full scope of what had happened and helped me begin the slow process of rebuilding trust, not just in others, but in my own judgment. About 3 months after the wedding, during a particularly quiet, reflective weekend, I sat down and wrote a letter to Claire. I want to be clear, I never sent it. I never intended to send it. It was something I needed to write purely for myself, a way of putting words to feelings I hadn't fully processed even after everything that had happened. In that letter, I wrote about the version of Claire I had fallen in love with, the woman who laughed easily, who remembered small details about my day, who made even ordinary evenings feel meaningful simply by being present in them. I wrote about how strange it felt to grieve someone who, in many ways, had never really existed the way I believed she did. I wrote about the anger too, not the explosive kind, but the quieter, more exhausting kind that shows up unexpectedly, in the middle of an ordinary afternoon, triggered by something as small as a song that used to remind me of her, or a restaurant we used to visit together. I wrote about forgiveness, and how complicated that word became once I actually lived through something worth forgiving. For a long time, I believed forgiveness meant returning to a place of trust, of closeness, of allowing someone back into your life as if nothing had happened. Writing that letter helped me understand a different kind of forgiveness, one that doesn't require reconciliation at all. A forgiveness that simply means releasing the weight of carrying anger every single day, without ever needing to tell the other person directly that you've let it go. I wrote, near the end of that letter, something I still believe deeply today. I hope you find honesty within yourself someday, Claire. Not for my sake, but for yours. Because a life built on hidden truths, no matter how comfortable it feels in the moment, eventually collapses under its own weight. I hope, wherever you are now, you're building something real. After finishing that letter, I didn't mail it. I didn't need Claire to read it. I simply folded it, placed it in a drawer, and felt something inside me loosen slightly, like a knot that had been pulled tight for months finally beginning to release. I think there's an important lesson in that experience for anyone going through something similar. Healing doesn't always require closure from the person who hurt you. Sometimes, the most powerful closure comes from within, from giving yourself permission to feel everything fully, to write it down, to speak it aloud if needed, and then, slowly, to set it down and walk forward without needing anyone else's permission or explanation to do so. If you've stayed with me through this entire story, I want to share something with you now, not as a dramatic conclusion, but as an honest reflection on everything I went through. Betrayal has a strange way of teaching you things about yourself that comfort never could. Before all of this happened, I thought of myself as an easygoing, trusting person, someone who gave people the benefit of the doubt because I believed most people were fundamentally honest. In many ways, I still believe that about most people. But I also learned that trust without awareness isn't really trust. It's simply blindness dressed up in kinder language. I learned that love, real love, cannot survive on performance alone. Claire was skilled at making moments feel real, at making affection feel genuine, even while living an entirely separate life behind my back. For a long time, I confused her skill at performing love with actual love itself. Real love doesn't require hiding. Real love doesn't need a convenient disguise to survive. I also learned something important about patience and timing. In the heat of that first devastating discovery, every instinct in me wanted to confront Claire immediately, to scream, to demand answers right then and there. But rushing into confrontation without clarity would have only given her the opportunity to control the story, to soften the truth, to manipulate the narrative the way she had clearly done before with smaller lies. Taking the time to gather full, undeniable truth wasn't about plotting cruelty. It was about making sure the truth, when it finally came out, couldn't be twisted, minimized, or hidden again. Sometimes the most powerful response to betrayal isn't loud anger. It's quiet, careful, patient clarity. I also learned an important lesson about protecting yourself, especially financially, when trust has already been broken in other areas of a relationship. Separating my finances early, before the full truth even came out publicly, protected me from consequences that had nothing to do with my own choices. It's not something people like to think about during moments of love and engagement. But protecting yourself isn't a betrayal of love. It's simply wisdom. Perhaps the most important lesson I learned, though, is this. Exposing the truth doesn't just protect you. It often protects others too. If I had quietly ended things with Claire privately, without ever revealing the full truth publicly, Vanessa would likely still be living inside a marriage built on hidden lies, still questioning her own instincts every time she sensed something was wrong. The truth, even when painful, gives people the power to make informed choices about their own lives. To anyone watching this who might be sensing small inconsistencies in their own relationship, a phone that's always face down, explanations that don't quite add up, a partner who seems distant in ways they can't quite explain, I'm not telling you to become suspicious of everyone you love. Most people are exactly who they say they are. But I am telling you this. Trust your instincts enough to look closer when something genuinely feels wrong. Don't dismiss that quiet, uncomfortable feeling in your chest just because the alternative, facing a painful truth, feels harder than ignoring it. Claire once believed she had found the perfect, convenient cover for her double life. A trusting, hard-working man who would never look too closely, never ask too many questions. She built her entire plan on the assumption that my love for her would keep me blind forever. She was wrong. And in the end, her carefully hidden betrayal didn't just fail to stay hidden. It collapsed everything she had built around it, in the most public, undeniable way possible. If there's one thing I hope you take away from this story, it's this. The truth doesn't stay buried forever. No matter how carefully someone constructs their lies, no matter how convincing their performance becomes, reality has a way of eventually breaking through. And when it does, it rewards patience, quiet strength, and honest courage far more than it rewards anger or revenge for its own sake. I didn't destroy Claire's life that day at the wedding. Claire's own choices did that, long before I ever stood up to speak. All I did was simply refuse to keep hiding the truth any longer. And sometimes, that's the most powerful thing you can do. I want to close this story by telling you where I am now, because I think it matters, not just what happened, but what came after, once the dust finally settled. It's been just over a year since that wedding day. My life today looks completely different from what I imagined it would look like back then, but in many ways, it looks better than I ever expected it could. I moved into a new apartment about 6 months after everything happened, wanting a fresh space that didn't carry the weight of old memories in every corner. I reconnected deeply with old friends I had drifted from during the chaos of wedding planning and the emotional toll of the investigation. My family, who stood by me through every difficult conversation and every late-night phone call during those hard months, grew even closer to me than before. Professionally, I found myself more focused, more driven than ever. Strangely, going through something so personally devastating gave me a kind of clarity about what I actually wanted from my life. Clarity I don't think I would have found if everything had simply continued on the comfortable, unquestioned path I was on before. I occasionally hear updates about Claire through mutual acquaintances, though I no longer seek that information out actively. From what I understand, she moved to a different city, started over in a new industry, away from event planning entirely. I don't feel anger anymore when I hear her name. Mostly just a quiet, distant sense of closure, the kind that comes only after enough time and enough honesty. Marcus's business, from what I've heard, never fully recovered from the scandal and the legal troubles that followed. Vanessa, on the other hand, seems to be doing remarkably well. We still occasionally check in with each other, two people who found an unlikely, understanding friendship built from shared betrayal and mutual healing. I won't pretend the entire experience didn't leave scars. There are still moments, usually small and unexpected, where old doubts creep in. Moments in new relationships where I catch myself watching a little too closely for signs that aren't actually there. Healing from betrayal isn't a straight line. It's slow, uneven, and sometimes frustrating. But it is possible. I've started seeing someone new recently, someone patient and understanding about the journey I've been through. It's early, and I'm allowing myself to move slowly, to trust carefully rather than blindly, to build something real rather than rushing toward an idea of what a relationship should look like. If you've experienced betrayal in your own life, whether from a partner, a friend, or someone you trusted deeply, I hope this story offered you something more than just entertainment. I hope it offered a reminder that the truth, however painful, is always worth pursuing. I hope it reminded you that patience and quiet strength can be more powerful than anger. And I hope it reminded you that no matter how deeply someone hurts you, your story doesn't end with their betrayal. It simply becomes the chapter where you finally learned the truth and started writing something better for yourself. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it moved you, if it resonated with something in your own life, I hope you carry its lesson forward. Truth always finds its way into the light, and the people who try hardest to hide it are usually the ones who end up most exposed by it in the end. Before I let you go, I want to step outside the story for a moment and speak directly to you. If you've made it this far, chances are something in this story touched a nerve. Maybe you've lived through your own version of this. A partner who smiled at you while hiding an entire second life. Maybe you're currently sitting with that same uneasy feeling I had the night I saw Babe 2 light up on a phone screen, telling yourself it's probably nothing, hoping you're wrong, terrified that you're not. I want to tell you something I wish someone had told me during those long, uncertain weeks before I knew the full truth. That uneasy feeling in your chest is not your enemy. It is not paranoia. It is not insecurity. More often than not, it is your mind quietly processing details your heart isn't ready to accept yet. Listen to it. Not with panic and not with immediate accusation, but with quiet, careful attention. I also want to remind you of something important. Discovering betrayal does not make you weak, foolish, or naive. It simply means you trusted someone the way relationships are supposed to work, openly, generously, without constant suspicion. The fault for betrayal never belongs to the person who trusted. It belongs entirely to the person who chose to break that trust. If you are currently in the middle of your own version of this story, still gathering pieces, still unsure, still afraid of what the full truth might look like, please be patient with yourself. You don't have to confront everything immediately. You don't have to have all the answers today. Truth, real truth, tends to reveal itself fully when you give it the space and the time to do so, just as it eventually did for me. And if you've already lived through your own painful ending, your own version of standing in front of people you love and finally speaking the truth out loud, I hope, more than anything, that you've found your way to some version of peace since then. Healing rarely arrives all at once. It comes in small, quiet moments. A morning where you wake up and realize you didn't think about them first thing. A conversation with someone new where you laugh freely, without old fear creeping into the edges. A day where the story finally starts to feel like something that happened to you, rather than something that still defines you. Betrayal changes you. I won't pretend otherwise. But it doesn't have to break you. In many painful, unexpected ways, it can actually clarify you, showing you exactly what you value, exactly what you will no longer accept, and exactly how strong you're capable of being when everything you believed in suddenly falls apart. Claire once believed her secret life could stay hidden forever behind a wedding ring and a trusting husband who never asked questions. She was wrong, not because I set out for revenge, but because truth, given enough time and patience, has a way of finding the light on its own. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who might need to hear it today. And if you're currently carrying a similar weight in silence, I hope this story reminded you of something important. You are not foolish for trusting. You are not weak for hurting. And you are more than capable of walking through betrayal and coming out the other side, stronger, wiser, and finally, completely free. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourself. And remember, the truth always finds its way into the light.